Hello and welcome to the Sugar Coated Marketing Podcast, where you get sweet advice on how to improve your marketing and grow your business. I am David Paris, your host, and in this podcast series, I interview top experts who give advice on the subjects of marketing, copywriting, advertising, and we even throw in a hint of self-development. Today, we've got an awesome interview lined up with Lukas Resheske, whose clients consist of people like Josh Turner and Ryan Levesque. Lukas shares with us the biggest mistake that most people make in their marketing.
They never, ever dig down into the subconscious and the psychological.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So, Lukas, going through your mentorship program, for me, the most valuable thing that I took away from it was what you called the Big Four. So I was hoping we could go over what the Big Four are in this episode and then specifically dive pretty deep into the primal desires.
Yeah. So the Big Four is a concept that I came up with when I first started training junior writers. It was all floating around in my head beforehand, but it wasn't really written down. And so when I started teaching other people, I realized that they needed certain ways to view the whole persuasion matrix, and so did I, to be honest. So I broke it down into 4 different pieces. The first part is the target market that you're trying to deal with. And when I say target market, I don't mean small, like just, okay, I'm targeting every 45-year-old in Cincinnati. I truly believe you need to go really, really, really deep and almost imagine another person on the other end of the message that you're trying to say. And that's my idea of a target market. So that's the first part of the Big Four. The second part is I call them the 3 primals, because every human is motivated by primal stuff. Most people who are in marketing have heard of this triune brain concept, but it's really just the fact that the brain evolved in 3 different kind of layers, and our decision-making process starts at the base layer. So that leads us to make decisions through fear, through desire, and through core needs, basically the stuff that our selves are always made up of. And once you figure out what those are for your target market, you can move on to your market's awareness. So that means how aware they are of your specific type of product or the business that you're in. And then once you've got a good idea of what that is, you move on to the 4th part, which is market sophistication. And that's what your competitors are doing and how they've marketed to your audience and how they've kind of structured their business and their offers. Once you have those 4 pieces of information, you are pretty much capable of making any message possible to either inform, educate, or persuade, or make someone take some sort of action that you want them to. And so that's why I think it's pretty important.
Because we don't really have time to cover each 4 of them. And really, you could probably create a course on each pillar in and of itself. But let's dive a little bit deeper into the primal desires, because I really feel like it's something that no one's really talking about right now. Most copywriters, I don't feel like really understand it and how to use it at its core. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the things that most people who are, I use this term really loosely, but classically trained in copywriting, because there is nobody trains anybody in copywriting. You kind of have to figure it out for yourself. There's never been you go through something and now you're considered a copywriter. But most people who train themselves in copywriting and go through the typical process of, hearing about the 25 books they need to read and maybe the course and maybe the people they need to follow and the swipe files and all this kind of stuff, they never, ever dig down into the subconscious and the psychological, other than maybe dabbling in NLP. But most people are not committed enough to go super, super deep into NLP. And even then, that's only a specific modality that doesn't talk about the primal stuff. But the reason I think that's important is because every single human being makes decisions based on their primal stuff, right? Their fears, their desires, their core needs. And so, yeah, let's dive into a little detail, because the way I try to do it is take what, is basically an entire body of work in science And for all three of these individually, and condense it down into something that makes sense for a business owner to use, like if they're writing a sales message today.
Right. And I mean, like, to be really crystal clear, this is the stuff that you put in your copy that is going to press the emotional buttons. You could probably mess up a lot of things, but if you get this right, you're still going to be moderately successful.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even just understanding that this is why your market does a certain thing is probably better than your competitors will ever get. So it's a huge competitive advantage.
Well, let's dive in.
So, all right, let's separate them down into three pieces. The first one is fear. So human beings have fear around stuff, but usually we layer our own understanding, our own rationalizations, our own history into our cognitive understanding of fear, which is just a fancy way of saying how we think about it. Like, if you think you're afraid of spiders, okay, cool, you're afraid of spiders. But when you kind of dissect the fear of spiders, it gets down into 5 categories. And those 5 categories kind of go up from straight up non-existence into kind of an egoic lack of existence. So, and I'm trying not to get really over the top here, but they go up. The first one is extinction. If you have primal fear of extinction, then you are genuinely worried that you will cease to exist. This is the cancer scare. This is the heart attack. This is the almost getting hit by a bus. This is the primal fear of simply not existing anymore and just going extinct for you as a person. Those types of things trigger basically our bodies and our minds' most primal reactions, right? When we're about to get hit by a bus, our body springs into motion without us thinking, and we jump out of the way, or we attempt to jump out of the way. When we have a heart attack, we reach for the nearest person, we reach for a phone, like we go into pure and simple action mode. The next one up is mutilation. And mutilation is not something that is necessarily going to kill you, but it is going to physically damage you in some way. And that, there's physical and psychological aspect to all of these. So the physical one is obviously, losing a limb or breaking something in a fall, or, getting hurt in a fight, or, something like that, right? It's still very physically rooted, but it can also be, losing your mind with dementia, or some things of aging that might not necessarily be physical mutilation, but they're still psychological or mental. The third one is loss of autonomy. And loss of autonomy is just where you no longer have control over yourself for some reason. And this runs the gambit from being paralyzed to being in prison, or feeling like you're in prison in something, like in a relationship, like an abusive relationship, or in a job that you don't like. That's loss of autonomy. That's that primal fear there. And when you go up from that, you go into separation, because we're social animals and we need connection. It's been proven across hundreds, if not thousands, of studies of humans and animals that humans are social creatures, and we have to feel connected with other people. And when we fear that there's going to be something that separates us from other people, like something that is physically separating us, as in a wall or a distance, like someone's moving away, going to college, something like that, or a psychological distance where they're giving you the cold shoulder, you've pissed them off somehow, you've broken up with a girlfriend, or gotten a divorce or something like that. All of those things are separation fears, and they're very real, because in our psychology and our physiology, separation usually meant a slow, agonizing death, because you're not in the social group anymore. So it's very real fear. And then the last one is ego death. And ego death is related to our social standing and our perception of self in the world and how we go about. So the fear of being humiliated. This is the fear of getting on stage and, talking in front of lots of people, the fear of saying the wrong thing when you're trying to ask a girl out and her rejecting you, the fear of looking foolish at your job because you made a wrong decision, the fear of your boss firing you because because he doesn't like you or because you don't like him or something like that. All of those are primal fears. And so each one of those has, some really distinct actions and reactions and feelings that go along with it that for most people are actually really intuitive. Like if you put yourself in the situation of someone experiencing one of these fears, you can probably feel what they're going to feel, right? Like if you're about to get hit by a bus or if you've ever had a near-death experience, you know what it means to have an existential fear. And if you've ever gotten fired from a job, you know what it is to have an ego death fear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, that's why, like, when you watch a horror movie and the person's coming around the corner, you can actually feel that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a physical reaction, and I think that most people, when they're thinking about marketing, one of the issues that happens with most people's marketing, especially if they're not like really trained out of this, is that they start from their own perspective and they try to figure out from their perspective how they can convince another person to do something, right? And it's going from them to the other person. But this really helps you get rooted in what the other person is already feeling and start from there and start from, okay, this person is in this situation. What about that situation could lead them to making the call, clicking the link, downloading the book, buying the program, all that kind of stuff. And I think that just this exercise alone, trying to get into the person's head, is helpful to fix that, like back and forth.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's where research comes in, because it's one of those things that it's not easy to do. And I mean, I think everyone who has tried to write some type of advertisement, other than like maybe Bond Halpert, because his dad trained him since he was a little kid, but I think everyone makes that mistake when they get started. And what we're really talking about is perception. It's the other person's perception, because what they perceive to be true is real to them, or at least feels very real to them in that moment. And especially when they're reading your ad.
Exactly. And almost all advertising is interruptive in nature. It's going to come into that person's life on purpose, on your purpose, and not on, not them requesting it, unless they're already in a funnel that came into their life based on what you wanted to do. So it's kind of up to us as marketers to do this work for the person, to make them, or to try and help them understand that the decision they're about to make, that the thing they're about to read, is relevant to where they're currently at in life. So yeah, and all of these big four are basically the market research process that I go through with any client, and that I teach all of my copywriting students to go through. Because if you have this at your disposal, I mean, you can probably already tell that having this at your disposal is going to make it a lot easier to write a message that's compelling for someone, rather than 50% off socks at Walmart today. So we'll go into desires here in a second then, because I'd like to give some examples of fear just in different industries. So if you're operating in, say, the insurance industry, and you're dealing with car insurance, well, you already know that car insurance is federally and state required to operate a vehicle. So the person has to buy car insurance from somebody, and you're aware that they're going to be reaching out to someone either with the lowest rate or with the type of coverage they need, even though they may not understand what type of coverage they need. It's not something that people are hyper educated on unless they've done this several times. So with that understanding of kind of where the person's coming from, if you go down to the primal fear associated with car insurance, it starts with this like loss of autonomy / ego death type fear, because you are afraid that if you don't have car insurance, that if you get pulled over, you could lose your vehicle, you could lose your license. So that's going to be humiliating for the first part, but it's also going to take away your ability to move and have a car. And that the government is like specifically requiring this. So the fear associated with it is around those two things: either them possessing your stuff and lowering your ability to be autonomous, or them humiliating you in front of, maybe your family, your friends, or whatever. That's the first fear. But a savvy insurance salesman or a savvy car insurance person can increase the value of their insurance by also tying in the fear of what would happen if you had bad coverage. And you've seen this on some ads that I forget. I don't know which car insurance company it is, but they're the ones where the spokesperson is standing in front of the Statue of Liberty. So it's probably like Liberty Mutual or something. Yeah, so you can weave the idea of car insurance and these fears of, what happens if you don't have good car insurance into the ad, and get people thinking about it from a different perspective other than cost and regulatory, like making it mandatory, or the legal ramifications of it. And that's going to not only allow you to probably justify a higher price, but also get them more interested in taking action right away. Because most people, if they're just afraid of, something legally making them do it, they're going to wait to the last second to do it, like take taxes, for example.
Well, I think what happens there when you make that switch is it's a switch in perception. And it's a switch in perception from, your prospective client, where they go from, I'm being forced to do this, maybe against my will, to, I need this because some really bad stuff is going to happen if I don't have it.
Right. And you're helping them get that realization. So, but it's not something, and this is why I think a lot of copywriters get the primal fears mixed up when they first learn about them too. It's not something that you can lead with in most cases. Like, you can't take that secondary primal fear and lead with it, because it's not in their mind. They're not thinking about it. Because you would have to tell a really, really compelling story to get them to think about it in that context if they weren't already actively looking for it. And does that make sense?
Yeah, and actually, I can give you a maybe somewhat better direct example from, when I sold life insurance and when I was a financial advisor. One of the things that I had to be very careful of, that I learned the hard way a few times with some of the first people I met with, was when you talk about someone potentially dying, and then they have the realization that could actually possibly happen to them, sometimes they freeze. So you have to be really careful with how you present the message, because fear, guilt, and shame in general, if they're intense enough, become freezing emotions for people, and then they don't take action because they psychologically and in their mind, the problem becomes so big that it's easier to just shut down and ignore it than to actually address the problem, even though it would really be in their best benefit to do so.
Right. Yeah, and especially in situations like that, it probably is, in their best benefit to do something. But yeah, you make a good point, because it's pretty easy to go a little too deep on these primals and just start scaring the crap out of people. So I always try to preface this stuff with, what would you say in a conversation? And what would you say in a conversation based on what your relationship is with that person? So if they just met you, you wouldn't say stuff that's nearly as harsh or blunt or specific as you would as if you knew them for your whole life, or they were family.
There's a point where even if what you say is true, it may not be believable to most people reading it.
Yeah.
Like if you say, take this pill or die, that's not gonna sell anything. People are gonna scoff at it and laugh, or make fun of it. Just the same as you would say, take this pill and lose 20 pounds in 2 weeks without exercising or dieting.
Right. Yeah, and it's all about market. And so you do the target market research first, and then you figure out, okay, what do these people feel in their primal fears, desires, and core needs? Because there are people who will believe crazy claims but won't believe truthful claims, and there are people who, so it all depends on the type of person that you're communicating with and what they consider to be true or believable. But after you figure that out, then you go down to primals or you go down to the primals and you really figure out, okay, why do they believe it, or what's driving those beliefs. And it really helps you cultivate your answers and your messaging around it, because when you stick all of this heady psychological stuff into a conversation with a person that you know about, it becomes a lot easier to manage. Otherwise, you're like, oh man, do I do extinction or mutilation? Like, I'm not sure which one it is. Or do I do separation or ego death? Like, that's hard for people because it's a label. But when you think about it from a person and you're talking to, a 35-year-old woman who's a single mom and she has 2 kids and she's getting a car and she needs car insurance, well, now you know that she's in a specific situation. So she needs car insurance because if somebody hits her and hurts her kid, then she's going to need them to pay for the healthcare, like stuff like that. It's something where her situation will help you create the message that you need from these primals. I think that's the most powerful thing behind it, and that's why I teach it.
Are there maybe some more specific examples you could share of like maybe some of the other different desires too, or is that something we can go into?
Yeah. So the fears are extinction, mutilation, loss of autonomy, separation, and ego death. And the desires, and because I call them the 3 primals, so there's the fears and then there's the desires. And the way that I label the desires are based on the 7 deadly sins. So pride, envy, lust, gluttony, sloth, wrath, and greed. Those are the old school Catholic Church kind of made it easy to figure out what people were primally driven by. And when you take these as independent reasons for acting or reasons for doing stuff, then you can sort through that stuff in your mind and figure out where your message is best fit. So with pride, pride is usually individually focused, like achievement oriented, I am a certain way type beliefs, and they're attempting to live up to their own image of themselves or to elevate their image of themselves in some way. That's their pride talking. Envy, however, is externally driven. If pride is internal, envy is external. And envy is something where you are trying to either stop a person from becoming better or becoming the same as you, or become better than another person. And that drive is externally focused and usually has a lot of fear of loss that comes with it. And just in generally trying to either improve or, in some cases, spite people around you, right? Because for some reason, that's your kind of driver. None of these are meant to inherently be negative, although when I talk about it, we can easily take that and like judge the person for feeling that way. They're meant to illustrate the subconscious animalistic type reason for doing stuff, right? Humans are capable of rising above their animalistic tendencies in all cases, but for the most part, when it comes to marketing and sales and buying stuff, they tend to make those decisions from a more baseline human standpoint than from a like higher consciousness standpoint. And so between pride being internal and envy being external, lust is pretty obvious. Lust is towards the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to you have sex drives, you have desire around the same sex, the opposite sex, like whoever you happen to desire. Maybe you lust after a specific type of object because it's inherently like a driving desire for you. That's when you think about lust, it pretty much comes up in all the situations where you think lust would be appropriate. So if you're selling dating products, if you're selling sexually related products, if you're selling lingerie, if you're selling anything to do with that world, that's probably where lust is going to come into play. Sometimes, not always. Gluttony is the desire for more. It's interesting to look at gluttony versus greed, because greed tends to be the hoarding and acquisition of things, whereas gluttony is the consumption of things. So if you are a person who is motivated by consuming a lot or by having the most to consume, that would be focused on gluttony. And an example of that would be, a person who is who's obsessed with food, a person who is obsessed with sometimes information. If you are a hobbyist information collector and you just want as much information as you can to consume it, that would be considered gluttony. Versus greed would be more focused on the acquisition and hoarding of stuff away from other people, and that would be, acquiring the most real estate, acquiring the most money, acquiring the most physical possessions, acquiring, all of those types of things as a primary motivator. Like, I want my house to be, this would be pride, but I want my house to be the biggest in the neighborhood versus I want to live in the best neighborhood that I can as a hoarding and collection thing. And then, so that's the difference between gluttony and greed. Sloth comes up when you just are motivated by not putting a lot of effort into the task. You want something, but one of your primary motivators is that you don't want to work that hard to get it. And that's not necessarily meaning you're lazy. It could be an executive motivated by sloth because he's so busy that there's no way that he'd be able to go to the gym the way he wants to. So his primary motivation of sloth around working out can be focused on getting a personal chef, getting a personal trainer that comes to his house and makes him do it in the 15 minutes in the morning that he has to do it. That's sloth, because he wants ease. He wants the least effort possible to get the outcome that he wants. And so obviously sloth can also be the fact that they're just lazy and they want something for nothing, or they want something to be easier, the easiest it can be, but it doesn't just have to be that. And then the final one is wrath. And wrath is basically what I would consider just straight up anger and spite, because they just want to, they are motivated by a deep-seated hurt or pain that they want to get back at someone for, and that is what is driving their wrath. And you see this a lot in conspiracy-oriented niches that are very emotionally driven by anger. You see this in a lot, like some self-defense where they're talking to the person who maybe has already been assaulted or attacked, and they want to get back at that person. They want to defend themselves. A lot of politics comes from wrath because they just kind of want to have their other team win. A lot of sports comes around wrath. And so all of those things are labels for the thing that is motivating that person primarily to reach for a specific desire.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to make sure we clarify for the listeners, most of the time, and I would say almost always, maybe other than pride or lust exclusively, almost always they're typically combined. When you mention someone having a nice house, it could be greed and pride. Or it could be greed, or it could be gluttony and pride. They want to have everything that's the best, and they want to hoard it and keep it themselves. So, in at the same time, when we describe these here, we're really talking about the extremes because that's when they're most visible. But you're not gonna say in an advertisement do you like to hoard everything and keep it for yourself and not let anyone else have it? You're never going to say something like that in an ad. That's not how people talk. And the last thing I would love to jump into is, let's try and get a few examples using those primal desires, just so it's clear for the listeners, so they might actually be able to, go and try this for themselves and do some testing with their own ads.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next thing I'll dive into is core needs. So I'll do all three of the primals, and then I'll put it together with something that's pretty easy. So after the desires, the primal desires, and you kind of choose whichever one or two you're going to work with primarily in your message, then you can move on to the research for the core needs of the audience. And I did not make up the core need concept. This is something that I found from Tony Robbins, but I modified from his. Obviously, he's focused on personal development and personal success, in that realm, and I applied it to copywriting because the interesting thing about core needs is that every single person on the planet is going to have the first four of the six human drives that they have, these core needs, always are going to be fulfilled by something. They will always have that slot in their life filled by something. And if something that you're selling or something that you're saying in your messaging threatens the thing they currently have in that slot, and it does not immediately offer a better alternative to fill that slot, then they will automatically and without even thinking disregard your message. It's like the easiest way to murder a conversion as possible by threatening and then not replacing a core need. And that's why I think they're so important and why I bring them up. But I say there's six. And I talk primarily about the first four because the last two are not always filled, and you basically have to fill the first four in a good way before you even start to care about the next two. And so the first four that will always be filled are certainty, variety, significance, and connection. Those are the first four. Every single person will always have something in their life that fulfills their need for certainty, fulfills their need for variety, for significance, and for connection. After they have those filled in a positive way, something that's not like tearing them down or beating them up or holding them back, then they can start to look to fulfill the two extra core needs, which are growth and contribution. And I think that's really important because if you're dealing with an audience that has their core needs fulfilled in a very positive way, as in they have a loving relationship and good relationships with friends, they feel significant in their work, they have variety in their work that keeps them, interested, and they have certainty, both, financial and personal, they're doing really well. And you'll notice that a lot of like entrepreneurs and executives and basically high performers, when they get these core needs met, they start looking for ways to grow personally, and they start looking for ways to contribute, like back to their society and, in philanthropic ways and stuff like that. So it's interesting to know about all six of them, because if you happen to deal with an audience that is either more successful than the average person or in certain ways, or seems to be more fulfilled, or, you deal with affluent individuals, you deal with high achievers, the last two human drives will come into effect. But if you're dealing with people who are not fulfilled the core ways, you don't have to worry about growth and contribution, and it's actually not going to matter to them. For example, a person who's dealing with heart issues and financial issues, as in, like maybe their heart is giving them medical trouble and they're dealing with financial issues, that person is probably not going to be looking for ways to contribute to their personal growth and then contribute to their society around them. So to describe them a little bit more in detail, your core need of certainty basically comes from the need of the person to feel like they are in control and that they know what's going to happen. For humans, it's very jarring to be in a state of chaos. We're not super comfortable in the unknown, and so certainty is that rock, is that stability that we use to keep things kind of stable for ourselves. For some people, that certainty is heroin. It's bad. It's like they get the certainty of the feeling they're going to get from the drug, but it's still fulfilled, right? Heroin is still fulfilling their core need. It's just not, it's a very, very destructive way of doing it. The second one versus having certainty around, like, if you have a job and you go to that job every day at the same time, they pay you the same amount every 2 weeks, you are certain, right? You're stable. Variety is the opposite of certainty, but it comes from, they kind of move along together. If you have things in your life that make you feel like you are active in life and you're not just trudging through, maybe it's the fact that your work is interesting to you. Maybe it's the fact that you meet new people when you're doing heroin in a heroin den. Like, the variety comes from the different things that come into your life that are new and interesting and unique, and something that help give you that spice, I guess. Significance is your standing among other people and how they perceive you, so their perceptions of you. And if you are getting the stability of significance from, say, your other heroin addict friends, or your your peers at work who value your contribution, but maybe they don't want you to quit because that would piss them off or something, that's your significance coming into play for a lot of different issues. Maybe you have friends who like to go out and drink and smoke on the weekends, and that's causing you to either gain weight or feel lethargic or not move forward in your business. That's obviously not a negative, or that's a negative way of doing a core need, but it still fulfills your need for significance. And then finally, the fourth one is connection. And these are your very, very close personal relationships, your spouse, your girlfriend or boyfriend, your very close friends, like your one or two best friends, your parents, your siblings, if you have them. Your connections matter. And the core need that you get from those connections are basically knowing that there are other people around you who can support you. It's a support network. And again, that can be positive or negative, but that support is there and locks people into this state of homeostasis, basically, where they just live around their comfort zone. Basically, if you can apply anything to it, it's the core needs. The first core needs equals your comfort zone, the person's comfort zone. And then if you're asking them to move outside their comfort zone with something, then you're threatening one of their core needs. Does that make sense?
Yep. And if you threaten their core needs, then people are going to either react violently, ignore your message, or shut down.
Yeah, most of the time they'll ignore it. That's what I've noticed anyway. If they notice a threat to their core needs that isn't fulfilled by the product right away, they'll ignore. They'll just ignore it. They'll move on. They'll be like, not for me, and then they move on. And whatever that "not for me" means to them, you'll never really know unless you understand their core needs. But they'll just move on. And if you're forcing them to do something, like let's say you're getting arrested and you're about to violate their core needs of significance by, maybe they're an upstanding member of their society, but they're about to get arrested for a crime, and that's going to make them lose their job or whatever, then they could very easily react violently to their perceived threat to significance, or their perceived threat to certainty. So in marketing, it's probably going to be primarily being ignored, but these are real things. Like humans make decisions because of these all day, every day. So it's important to understand. That's in a nutshell. I mean, obviously you can see that there's a lot of detail that goes on with the big four and just the three primals in general, right? We didn't even talk about how to figure out exactly who your target market is, how to figure out what the awareness of your people are in terms of your product, and how to find out the sophistication of your marketplace. We didn't even touch on that. But with the three primals, there's actually a pretty simple way, once you understand what you're looking for, to incorporate what you learned into your sales message. And if you want, I can share that, because it might bring all of this together for people who are kind of like, whoa, what did I just hear?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you've studied copywriting for a while, you've probably come along the headline formula of how to X without Y, even if Z, right? That you've probably heard of that formula in some way, shape, or form. How to tie your shoes without bending over, even if you've never tied your shoes before. right? How to make $1 million even if you live in a cardboard box. Or I'm sorry, how to make $1 million without doing any real work, even if you live in a cardboard box. Like, that's the headline formula. How to X without Y, even if Z. When you take the 3 primals, you can see how those would fit into a message that makes sense in that formula. Because how to X is their desire, right? Without Y is their fear. And even if Z is their core needs, right? You talk about their core needs if there's a threat to their core needs. So, I mean, you can apply this to almost anything, but just to give some really, I guess, just throw some examples out there. If you, like, because I know, David, you're operating in the guitar market. And so you probably understand primal fear, desire, and core needs of this market a little bit better, so you can kind of help out. But the how to X might be how to learn a new song in 10 minutes without knowing how to read music, even if you haven't picked up a guitar in 5 years, right? That headline. And so the desire is learn a new song in 10 minutes, right? I'm appealing to sloth, maybe a little bit of pride, maybe even a little bit of envy, because like they've got guitar friends who can play better than them. They want to, at their show, maybe they want to like prove something to themselves pride wise. Maybe they're just really interested in guitar, but they're lazy and they don't want to practice. So that's my desire frame, right? And then I move it directly into fear without knowing how to read music. And in this case, I'm dealing with ego death because their fear would be they don't feel like they're a real musician because they can't read music, right? And so they can't learn a song really fast because they can't read music. They can't see the notes. That's their fear, right? And if you dig a little bit deeper, it's like, I'm not a real musician because I don't practice, or because I feel like I failed, or because I'm not good as everybody else, whatever. Like it once you dig down, you see some stuff, but that line kind of assuages their fear of not knowing something that is going to be an excuse, right?
Yeah, so I mean, for the guitar market, to a large extent, a solid 80, maybe 85% of the market is men, and more specifically, men that are 45 to 55. But at the same time, of new people learning how to play, 90% of them quit within the first year. So, the market really consists of that 10% that keep up with it. So I think more of a specific fear they might have is, if I don't learn how to play now, then I'm never going to learn. For that market, you might say something like, learn how to play your favorite songs by practicing only 10 minutes a day, even if you've never played before, using this new method.
Right. Yeah, something like that. So, and then that even if thing brings in their core needs, where you can, if you're about to challenge their core needs in some way, then you can bring in basically like a wait, don't go yet, because I'm not challenging your core needs, or because something better is on its way. So,
or like back to like an older person learning guitar, like even if you never played when you were younger, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So, if they get certainty from, I don't know, I don't know which core need that would be threatening necessarily. You see core needs threatened a lot with transformative type offers like fitness and health, personal development, business, things like that. But sometimes there's core need stuff that's being met by certain things that in other markets would be important to bring up. Like maybe they're an active musician right now. They're actually playing, and your headline has to convince them to continue reading the ad, even if they think that they could never do a solo without a guitar pick, or something like that. Like their level of certainty is using a guitar pick, but your method uses only finger picking. Something like that.
Or like self-defense. Learn how to fight even if you're the biggest sissy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. Or like their certainty comes from like I mean, let's say like their certainty comes from having a weapon.
Sure.
In self-defense, that's, I like, that's actually a really big thing I've seen in self-defense, which is, and that's why John Carlton's ad about this guy will give you a free gun just to prove he can take it away from you works so well, because one of the big objections in that marketplace is, I have a gun, I'm just going to shoot my attacker, right? And that's a core need, or that's their level of certainty. They truly believe that, right? But the headline can basically bring that up and say that how to destroy your attacker in 3 seconds without training for years, even if you have a gun but can't get to it, or even if you're surprised and can't get to your gun.
I think the most important part there is can't get to it, because then it removes that objection. Well, I'll just pull out my gun.
Exactly. And that's that's the thing, that you can use that phrase, that even if, and then you go into the thing that's going to protect you from that core need violation. And that's just a headline complex. Like you can do the same concepts pulling through the lead, or, in the rest of the video or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. And now I think that we've hit time here, so I just wanted to thank you for coming on to the show, Lukas. It was absolutely great to have you on, and hopefully we can bring you back sometime to maybe go into another part of the Big Four there.
Cool. Awesome. I appreciate you having me on, David. Thank you.